Hey, what's going on, guys? As you know, recently we took a look at this MOOC here, which was all about kind of basic modeling tips for mixing builds, otherwise known as kit bashing, and it got me very inspired, motivated to work on a kit bash project. And I actually already had a couple of different ideas in mind for the two different versions of the RX-78-2 that we've had released recently. We have the 2.0 version of the RG RX-78-2 and the 1/44 scale revival version of the Gundam. Now, I'm not going to be kit bashing the two of these together. I actually want to do something different with each one. We'll talk some more about the RG in a different later video. But what I'm doing with that kit is actually mixing it with some parts of a Zeon mobile suit. And so I want to do the same thing here with the Revival Gundam, but I wanted to try to keep it like within the style. So because this is in this like old 80s retro style, I wanted to choose an old 80s retro Zeon kit to kit bash some parts onto this. Even though we have all the nice new technology in this version, still I want like the aesthetic look of it being an older kit. And so I've got the old ReGelgu kit, which is a favorite of mine in terms of the design. I love the ReGelgu. I can't say this actual kit is a favorite of mine. These old kits are nice and fun from time to time, but we have a nice new HGUC version of this, which is much better. That said, this one has all the old styling to it, which will make for some perfect kit bash material here onto the Gundam. So basically what my plan is to take some of the parts from the ReGelgu and adapt them onto the Gundam here, and then we'll paint it, and it'll be a fun mixing project or kit bashing project. So the first step is just going to be deciding essentially which parts from the ReGelgu I want to adapt onto the Gundam, because basically I want it to look like sort of not an entirely new machine, but I want the ReGelgu parts to basically look like equipment added onto the Gundam. So it's going to be fairly straightforward. Obviously we're going to use the big shoulder parts, probably the backpack of the ReGelgu. If we just kind of take a look at some parts of the design here in the manual, basically everything that makes the ReGelgu different from the Gelgug is what I want to use for this custom project adding on to the Gundam. So yeah, these shoulder parts, the backpack, I think these parts here on the side of the arm, which we do have a couple of options for those. The beam rifle, probably going to end up using that rather than the Gundam's beam rifle. And yeah, I think then we'll see. I really wish that this kit included the Gelgug's shield as well. It doesn't look like we've got that in here, unfortunately, but I think that's probably going to be the extent of it. We'll see about maybe adding like the mohawk on the back of the head or something that might be kind of cool. And then maybe the bell bottoms around the lower leg, make those look like additional equipment like attached around to the lower leg of the Gundam. Might be kind of interesting. We'll see how it all works out. But first of all, the shoulders are the main thing. Let's go ahead and start with those. So what I need to do is basically just look here in the manual. What I'm going to do is just essentially cut out the shoulder parts and see kind of what we have to work with there, and then we can figure out how we're going to actually make them work on the Gundam. Now with these old kits, they're not snap fit, so even though you do have one teeny tiny little peg that will basically just act as like a guide peg here for just placing the two parts together there like that, it's not going to actually hold the parts together at all. So just for the time being, what you can do, what some people do, is just put a little bit of glue on it, enough to hold it together, but enough so that you can still take the parts apart again later. Just going to put a little bit of masking tape on here just to hold the parts together temporarily while we're just kind of sizing it up, basically. And so here on the Gundam, we can pop the arm off. This shoulder armor here for the Gundam actually works like that, where you can actually twist and turn that off. We're not going to use this, but we might end up using that. So first, let's just kind of compare what we have to work with here. So both of them actually work very similarly in that it's just like a hole. As you can see, the hole is going to be a different size, so that's going to be our problem. This will fit onto here just like that, and then our arm will fit on to there. And so it actually just fits on there perfectly, but you know, it's still going to be kind of loose. So we have a couple of different options what we can do. One option would just be to literally just glue that straight onto there like that, but I do want to maybe do something a little bit more with it. Since we have the shoulder armor piece, which already has the hole exactly the right size that we need, and we're not going to use it for anything else, we might as well just basically cut off the side part so this is just a flat piece with the size of the hole that we need. We can just glue it directly onto here, and then that will just work onto there like so. And actually one part of the ReGelgu and the Gelgug's shoulder designs, if you guys are familiar with it, actually has like this like multiple plates like between the torso and the arm. So having this basically sheet glued onto there, it will not only give us the correct connection piece that we need, it will also just look relatively natural for the Gelgoog's design, or the ReGundam's design in this case. So that actually worked really nicely. Now, one thing about this is that I think like what I might like to do is to make this to be set so it's like actually up at a little bit more of an angle. But one thing that I'm going to really be trying my best to do for this one is not focus so much on what I think might ultimately look cool, because I do really want it to look, I really want it to maintain this retro look. And you know, that's one thing about these older kits, is that they may not have all the parts, you know, correctly positioned to be like sort of more quote unquote more cool looking in terms of the angles and kind of what we expect from more modern kits. So having the shoulders just straight out like that is pretty typical of this type of kit, and that's how I want it to look ultimately, even though I think, you know, it may look better with it being a little bit more up like that. Having it straight out is kind of more realistic to this type of kit. So anyway. And so there we go. Once we got this basically just as a flat plate, you can see this can just be glued right onto the side of here like that, and then our shoulder will be done. Now obviously we have a seam line on here, so I'm going to need to get rid of that. In the meantime, that shouldn't be too tricky. And then we have these parts on the inside, basically the thruster barrels that will fit in there. Those can also be added later. So for right now, I'm just going to get rid of this seam line here, or at least glue it for the time being. We'll have to come back later on once the glue is cured, and then it's probably going to need some putty and all that other stuff too. So just sanding this a little bit here first before we add the glue and glue this together. All right, so we got to give that glue some time to do its thing. Then we'll get those cleaned up and we'll work some more on those. I'm going to set those aside for the time being. Let's talk about the legs a little bit. So I got the leg armor here and just kind of wanted to check and see how this might be looking on the kit. And I think it's going to look really good. And actually, there's even more good news. So we're having like a lot of luck with this, because that shoulder armor is going to be a really simple fix to get that onto there. And this leg armor is also going to be really, really simple. So first of all, the way that this new kit is designed, it's very easy to just separate the lower leg as its own piece like that. That makes it easy to work on. We don't have to worry about seams locking the knees and foot together, things like that. And if we want to see how this is going to fit on, you can see that there's two pegs for this, one down here and one up here. That one will actually line up really well with our knee joint to kind of for the Gundam right there. So basically what I can do is drill this out a little bit and cut this down a little bit so that it's short. And ultimately that's just gonna fit directly onto like that. This lower, larger peg, we can basically just cut that off and get rid of that. And this Gelgoog's leg armor here will just be connected right at that knee joint, and it should work out pretty well. Now, the only thing that I'm thinking that we might need, that might be an issue, is that this knee armor here on the front of the Gundam and on the sides, if any of this is like sticking out a little bit too much that we can't get the Gelgoog's leg armor closed up all the way around it, then we might need to shave that down a little bit. And then also you'll remember that there is a little bit of a seam line right here on the back of the Gundam's legs. Now that's mostly not going to be very visible. Once we get this part on here, it will be a little bit visible at the top, so I do want to get rid of that first. But again, I think we're lucking out that this is going to be a pretty straightforward project. So first of all, just getting rid of this peg here. It's a pretty thick one there, so be careful. This is the kind of thing that can break your nippers if you're working with like some very expensive God hands or something like that. I would not recommend using your nippers for this, but I feel pretty confident that my very well used USA Gundam Store nippers here are up to the task. And actually considering this a bit more closely, there is one problem that I think we are going to run into, in that you can see if I drill a hole here into the side of the knee for this to plug into like that, then that's basically where the structure is that makes this peg running through the center there, which is going to be what holds like our C-clip, our joint there. You could get rid of that entirely and then just glue this into place like that. But if we do still want some functionality, if I do want to be able to bend that knee, we need to maintain that inside there. And I think there's a pretty easy way that we can do that. It's basically a larger peg with a hole and a smaller peg that fits through that. What we can do is get rid of this smaller peg and drill all the way through and just replace that with what looks like it's probably just like a 2mm rod. And then on our Gelgoog parts right here, we can just put a 2mm rod straight through to both halves. That'll go through like from this one through the whole center of the knee all the way to the other one there like that, and that should work pretty nicely. So we can go ahead and get rid of this. I'm gonna keep that, like the rest of that structure there like that if I can. And we're once again gonna just rely on our drill set here. Very useful, and like I said, I think that's a 2mm, but just in case, let's start off with actually something smaller. Let's do a 1.5 first. And for the other half here, just straight through, I think 1.5 was right here for this. So it fits in here pretty good. And then you can see that that's what's gonna fit into here as well. So we'll just use a 1.5mm brass rod to go through that. And while we're here, this is a good opportunity to demonstrate how to remove this seam line on here that I thought about including in the review video. So I did include like a couple of tips in the review video for this kit about like some other different modifications. But if you were wanting to remove this seam line here for the back of the calf, it kind of locks around this part here for the lower leg, but really simply what you can do for that, just take this part right here and we're just going to cut a gap right in this part right there, just like that. Basically open that up, and so then when we take these two pieces, you glue them together, you remove the seam line and everything there. And then just to put this back on, you just pop it back onto here. That top part, that peg will fit in, and then this part you'll kind of have to wiggle that one in. You could honestly just kind of get rid of that altogether and then just glue this right onto there. But like I said, you can just wiggle that in at the bottom and pop that into place there like that. And that is if your seam line was already sealed up, which I will go ahead and do here in just a moment. For me, the whole rest of the seam line kind of doesn't really matter. It's only that top part, and I'm going to be covering this up and just kind of painting this all as one section anyway. So I don't really need to have this calf armor as a separate part. I can just kind of leave it all together like that, but just thought I'd show you guys how that modification could work if you wanted to do that. Now, before I set that peg in there, just kind of checking how's the fit. Even with that kind of cut down as much as I can, it's still not going to be able to close up all the way, which means I'm going to have to get rid of either shaving down some of the inside of the Gelgoog's leg armor or some of the Gundam's calf armor right here. And I think what I'm going to actually do is a little bit of a combination of both. And had I had checked this beforehand, just using a caliper just to kind of check what our width is there for that knee joint. And if we take a look here on our Gelgoog leg armor parts, you can see that's like not even, like just barely kind of gonna fit. So I think we're gonna have to both basically get rid of as much as we can around on the inside here of the Gelgoog's armor, and then also start to shaving down here some of the Gundam's side of the leg, as those Gelgoog parts are just gonna barely fit around this knee joint. So I've got a router tool here, which should help make some pretty relatively quick work of this ideally. So after, again, a fair bit of bumping and grinding there, I just have this basically taped closed. I think ultimately what we're going to end up having to do is just basically kind of grind down everything inside there, remove the seam lines on this, or just glue this, and then basically make this thin enough so that it will just fit up inside of there like that, and then we'll just glue it in place like that, and that'll basically just be our lower leg. So we're kind of making a mess of everything inside there, but as long as the little bit at the top that's going to show just looks normal like that, and then the lower leg is going to look fine sticking out the bottom, then we're all good. So no problems there really with that. Ultimately end up just being like a little bit messy and a little bit trickier than I was expecting, but really still not all too bad. So that looks good. And we can just go ahead and proceed a little bit here with this. I got both of these leg parts glued, and now once again we just gotta kind of set those to the side for the moment and wait. Now one thing I'm pretty sure we're probably, because we didn't get like a really good connection between these parts, so there's gonna be some gaps to fill basically. So it gives us a good excuse to try the technique of basically making some plastic putty filler out of our just plastic here. And if you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, basically you can just take some of your runner or leftover parts or whatever, anyway, plastic of like the same color, and you just chop it up into a bunch of little tiny bits, toss it into a spare bottle here like this. And then we're gonna toss some extra thin cement in there, let that sit, and the cement will basically break it down. It'll turn it into like a plastic goo, and then you can use that as a filler instead of using putty or super glue or whatever else. I've never really tried it before, so not in like a large batch. I've made just like tiny little bits of it, but pretty sure we're gonna need at least a little bit of it. So it's a good excuse to go ahead and make some. So it's just a matter of chopping this up here. It'll just take a second. Smaller pieces will be better. The glue will be able to break it down faster. You know, it takes a little bit more time though. Okay, so literally 1,000 cuts later, and we have a good amount. Actually, using a smaller size bottle will probably be a good idea, because this is like a large bottle and you're never really gonna need that much of this. So anyway, this is just the spare bottle that I had on hand. So we're just gonna pour a little bit of glue in there, and then yeah, we just gotta let that kind of chill out for a while, do its thing. So we'll come back to it. I also have not ever used this SMS thin cement, but I'm just assuming it's kind of gonna work exactly the same. Just gonna actually do this. Try not to make, and just to make sure I don't make a mess if I accidentally spill some of this glue, I'm gonna try not to. All right, so yeah, it's a good thing I put this box down there, because it did end up spilling a bit. Also, sure is stinky, so make sure you have good ventilation if you're gonna be doing this. As always, just gonna mix that up a little bit, pop the cap on, and then we just gotta set this to the side for a little bit. All right, so next up then, moving on to the arms. We have a few different options for what we wanna use on the arms. You have these parts for the left and the right side, which would basically just attach onto there like that. They are asymmetrical, they only go like on one side, and so these would be the standard look for the ReGelgu, and I think probably what I'm gonna go with here for the right side, anyway, here. But you do have a few other options. You have like the standard Gelgug parts here. I'm not gonna use that just because I just don't really feel like I want to. You also have this like really cool like 3-barrel grenade launcher kind of thing here, and this is what I was planning on using, but if you look here, if we attach this onto the side of the arm here, it's going to be clashing here with the shoulder armor. There's just not like really enough space there for that. I could attach it onto the back of the arm, but you can see this is actually quite wide, so I think it's just going to look a bit odd on here. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end up sticking this to the side, saving this for another build later on. I think this is a really cool part that I'm looking forward to using on something else, but unfortunately I just don't think it's really gonna suit this particular project. Another option that we have is this one. This one is interesting because this part is one of the parts in this kit, and there's more than one, where it has this rough texture molded onto the front of it like that. If you look here on this side compared to the side, it has the standard just kind of smooth, flat, shiny surface on it, but has this molded texture on this side. Also that big sink right there that's gonna need to be filled in, but probably just gonna sand this all down anyway. This part, so yeah, is meant to be like here attached to the back of the arm, I suppose, but I think we could attach it onto the side if we want, which I think is probably what I'm gonna go with, just to make it look more kind of like a shield, I think, on there. As you can see for this one, all it is just a peg, so all we gotta do is just drill a hole and pop that on there, real simple. And I should also mention, by the way, that this shoulder armor is not fixed yet. I still haven't put the plate part in between, so that's why it's still like flopping around like that. But I just had that on there just to demonstrate to you guys how we were not going to have enough room for that other arm piece. So there's our hole, and this is just going to fit onto the side of there like that. So still some, even that one is still going to be kind of tight in there. It's going to be very close to the shoulder armor, with that shoulder armor just being so large, but that gives us this nice sort of shield armor plate there on the side of the arm that will take some sanding and some putty to clean that up. For the other side, this one's a little bit different, as the way that this plugs on is via those two pegs right there. I think what I'm going to do is just get rid of those. We got to get rid of the seam line here on this as well, and then after that, basically what we'll do, we'll just drill a hole into the back of here and drill a hole into the back of the arm, and then just use a piece of runner to just peg that right onto there. So we won't actually use these connections that it's made to use, but we'll just make a new one so that can just fit right there onto the back of the arm. We want basically that elbow, that circle there for the elbow, and this circle bit just to kind of line up there, something like that is ultimately what we're going to be going for. So fairly simple for that one as well. First, I just need to get rid of this seam here. All right, now last couple things then are just going to be the backpack and the rifle. Now the backpack, actually we have the parts in here to make either the high mobility type backpack for the ReGelgu or for the Gelgu cannon. And what I want to do is actually kind of combine the two. I want to use most of the backpack for the ReGelgu, but I do want to take the cannon part from the Gelgu cannon and attach this onto here. So it's meant to go like on here like this, and it doesn't exactly fit, but it's basically just this little corner right here, which is just not allowing that to fit on properly. You guys can see it better if I show you from this side. So you can see it just doesn't exactly fit on quite right like that. So I can either just like cut that down a little bit or cut into this part a little bit in order for that to fit into there, which actually maybe might look a little bit better. So we might opt to do that. Either way, I think we can adapt the cannon onto the backpack here, and that should look pretty good. It's got like the fuel tank sticking out the back and a couple of other parts that go onto here. This is just the basic part of the backpack. And you can see here on the back, it's obviously not going to fit on straight as is. It's just got these two pegs. One I have kind of covered up with the masking tape there. So either the option is drill new holes for these existing pegs or get rid of these pegs and then drill holes in here and then just make a couple of connection pegs between the two, which I think is probably what I'm going to end up doing. I think that's probably just the easiest way to go about it. So I'm going to cut these off here. Just a couple of quick snips, and then you can see if we have this flat against the back, it's going to be kind of quite down at an angle. I think I want this to be a little bit sticking up like that. And again, I'm not going to be worrying about kind of just that sort of thing too much here, like I mentioned with the shoulders, but that's something that can easily be done by just making the peg connecting the two here. The kit is falling apart in my hands. By just making the pegs connecting the two just set at it like a little bit more of like a straight angle rather than like this, just being a little bit of an angle like that. Then when we connect the two, we can get rid of that. Also, I can grind down this edge a little bit here on the front so that we can get a little bit more flat kind of connection here for the backpack there. I think that also might be a good idea just because we have a lot of just like kind of empty space here on the top that we could just honestly get rid of. Some of that I think might be a good idea. So that's going to be pretty straightforward. I'll work on that. Then for the rifle, actually really good news here, and that this is one solid piece. We don't have seam lines here on the rifle, which is awesome. There are going to be like mold lines going all the way around. It's definitely going to take some sanding and everything, and there's a separate piece for the camera. For the rifle holding hand, it's actually like 4 parts. It's 2 parts for like the main hand, and then the trigger finger is a separate part, and then the 3 other fingers are also a separate part. So sort of like old style master grade hands, but very interesting. So this is probably what I'm going to do, get rid of the seam line on here. I'm just going to ultimately just kind of make this all into one thing. I think probably would just be a good idea. Just go ahead and just glue that into place with the hand parts once we get the hand parts sorted out. Then attaching this onto the Gundam's hand, you can see that's not going to be an exact fit, and there's a couple of ways we could go about doing that. Probably the easiest way would be just to see if I have a little plastic pipe. Let me see what I got here. What I was hoping I might have is a thin wall pipe that could just fit over this peg and just make it just slightly larger and make it so that it will fit into there. Unfortunately, I don't have that, and looking at this, it's really like it's really close. It's almost fitting in there. And honestly, it could just like wrap some tape around that and then just stick it in there would probably be the easiest way. But I think similar to like what we were doing with the backpack and the part for the side of the arm, probably what we're going to do is just cut off this peg and make a new one. Just using this is just a 4mm thick plastic rod here. So we'll cut that off, glue the seam line here on this, drill a 4mm hole right there. And then this 4mm pipe actually doesn't exactly fit in there. I'll have to file it down a little bit. It's really close to fitting in there. Actually, this is made for a ball joint, as that's what the original hands used, just a ball joint on there. I don't really need it to be a ball joint, just a peg will work fine. So once we make a new peg and I just sand that down a little bit so that it'll just fit into there, and that'll work perfectly fine. And so for now, it's basically just like a waiting game. I can work on like just cleaning up some of these parts here, preparing some of these parts. Otherwise, just kind of waiting for the plastic cement to dry on some of those parts. Then I can do a little bit more work on that. So I think for now, I'm gonna end the video here. We've made some good progress. Basically, we have everything laid out for our custom build, and it should be, you know, relatively straightforward for this one. Pretty easy kit bash. It's just now a matter of just like cleaning up everything, preparing all the parts, and so we'll cover that in the next video. I'll come back and show you guys kind of how everything's looking after doing some of that work, and then we'll get to the painting, and that should be, yeah, that should be just about it, kind of pretty much. I don't think there's really too much else that we need to do here for the Gundam itself. For these thigh parts here that consist of like an inner and outer piece like that, I'm not sure if I might try to close that up and maybe fill in that seam there or something. Maybe I will. I might use some of my plastic filler for that. That, by the way, is melting down pretty well. We'll be able to use that for getting rid of our seams here in just a bit. But yeah, that's gonna do it for right now. I'm gonna work on this a little bit and then we'll come back with part 2, which could be the second and final part, I think very likely, but we'll cover that in an upcoming video. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Hopefully you're looking forward to seeing how our ReGundam is gonna look, and it should be pretty awesome, I think. So if you guys wanna check out some more paints, tools, supplies, kits, not the Regelgu kit, but this kit I think we do, I believe, have in stock at the moment. You can check the link in the video description to USA Gundam Store. Got all sorts of great stuff, like a lot of the stuff you've seen me using in today's video. You can check that all out there on the website. And as always, guys, thanks so much for all of your support. If you enjoyed the video, if you found it helpful, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to stay tuned for more stuff on the way. But for now, that's gonna do it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.